Wherever flowering plants flourish, bees, butterflies, birds, and other flying insects are hard at work providing a critical but often unnoticed service to nature. These are the pollinators, nature's important contributors to the world's food production, agriculture, and environmental health. The most noble and hardworking of these little heroes are the honeybees. Known for creating honey, one of the most natural, health-giving, and divinely sweet substances on earth, they also manage one of the most vital steps in the production of our food crops. On a mission for nature, they diligently fly from flower to flower, gathering pollen and nectar which they depend on for food and to sustain their colonies. When they fly from blossom to blossom, they transfer the pollen that is stuck to their legs and furry bodies, which fertilizes the flowers of the same species, and the miracle of pollination occurs. The pollinated flowers of food-bearing plants produce seeds, which become fruits or vegetables or nuts. Of the 100 crop species that provide 90% of our global food supply, 71 of those crops are bee-pollinated. This represents 1/3 of all food crops worldwide that are dependent upon the pollination services of bees. Along with their compatriots, the wild bumbles, the butterflies, and the other pollinators, the honeybees are dependent on the flowers, and we are dependent on them to pollinate the flowers that becomes our food. This is part of the beautiful and mysterious cycle of interdependence known as the ecosystem, and the balance of nature that sustains us. But something is terribly wrong. The pollinators are sick and dying off at alarming, unsustainable rates. Wild bees, particularly bumblebees, and the monarch butterflies are also in peril. Continents all over the globe are experiencing a serious decline of their pollinators. The loss of bee colonies in Europe has accelerated to astonishing levels since 1998. Since 2004 in North America, so many of their honeybee colonies have been lost that the number of managed colonies now remaining is the lowest it has ever been in the last 50 years. Chinese beekeepers, who manage both western and eastern species of honeybees, have such a shortage of natural pollinators that workers must pollinate by hand. Beekeepers in Japan have also been confronted with massive losses of their bee colonies. And even in Egypt, where humans have been managing bees for over 7,000 years, sharp collapses in the number of their colonies is still occurring. In fact, every continent on Earth except Antarctica is experiencing alarming losses of managed and wild bees at unsustainable rates. In 2006, the global scientific community classified this disturbing trend as colony collapse disorder, or CCD, a phenomenon where suddenly and without warning, all of the adult worker bees disappear from the hives. Abandoned and without food provided by the worker bees, the brood and the queen eventually die from starvation and disease. If the worker bees do manage to make it back to their hives, the whole colony ceases to function properly and dies within a few weeks. There are 3 main reasons attributed to CCD and the decline of the pollinators. The most prevalent is infestation by the Varroa destructor mite, a parasite which infests the hive and brings with it deadly viruses. The second is fragmentation of their habitat caused by development, herbicide spraying, and industrial monocrop planting. But the most logical and likely culprit contributing to CCD is a family of highly toxic pesticides known as neonicotinoids, which have become the standard method of pest control in global industrial food production and monocrop planting for the biofuel industries since the early 1990s. Neonicotinoids, also known as neonics for short, are systemic sublethal nerve poisons chemically similar to nicotine. Some studies have found that the bees were actually drawn to the crops that had been treated, much like a smoker who craves nicotine. Bees who have been poisoned by neonics exhibit tremors, uncoordinated movement, and convulsions. The bees are also unable to fly and navigate, and their ability to learn is impaired, which impacts their ability to forage and provide food for their colonies. So what is sublethal contamination? And what are systemic pesticides? And why are they so dangerous to our ecosystem and our pollinators? Sublethal literally means less than lethal or less than deadly. Sublethal contamination refers to the presence of the pesticides at the cellular level, not enough to cause immediate death, but still enough to have adverse and chronic effects. Neonics can be applied by multiple methods, as foliar sprays to above-ground flowering plants and trees, as root drenches and soil treatments, or even as trunk injections directly into the trees. But the most common method is by coating the seeds. This causes systemic contamination because the chemicals move up into the stem, leaves, nectar, and pollen of the treated plants as they grow, becoming a part of the plant's life system at the cellular level, making the entire plant toxic. Because neonics are water-soluble, which means that they are able to be dissolved in water, they can remain and accumulate in soil, groundwater, and plant tissue for many years. This also means that they are present in the environment at the molecular level, creating a toxic ecosystem that exposes other plants and wildlife to contaminated soil or water long after the treated crops have been planted and harvested. Since their introduction to the market in the late 1990s, neonics have come under increased scrutiny over their environmental effects all over the globe. Environment International, a well-respected professional journal concerning the impacts of contaminants in the environment, released a report January 2016, which studied the link between bee diseases and systemic pesticides, particularly neonics. This review was conducted by an international team of scientists from Australia, the UK, Italy, Japan, and France, and concluded that neonicotinoids and interacting pesticides are important stress factors underpinning colony health decline and eventual collapse. Broadly similar patterns of synergy between parasites and pesticide exposure are evident in bumblebees and are likely to be found in many wild insects and other wildlife. Scientific research about the impact of systemic pesticides on a variety of beneficial species and food sources has been growing for the last 20 years. But the science has not been considered conclusive until now. In 2015, IUCN, the International Union for Conservation of Nature, the world's first and largest professional global conservation network founded in 1948, reported that systemic pesticides do pose a global threat to biodiversity and ecosystem services. The conclusions of this new meta-analysis of systemic pesticides confirm that they are causing significant damage to a wide range of beneficial invertebrate species and are a key factor in the decline of bees. The Task Force on Systemic Pesticides, a group of global independent scientists affiliated with the IUCN Commission on Ecosystem Management and the IUCN Species Survival Commission, has found that there is clear evidence of harm sufficient to trigger regulatory action worldwide to ban the use of neonicotinoids immediately. Undertaking a full analysis of all the available literature, approximately 800 peer-reviewed reports provided by independent and corporate-sponsored studies. This analysis, known as the Worldwide Integrated Assessment, published in the Journal of Environmental Science and Pollution Research, found that systemic insecticides pose a wide range of severely negative impacts on the food chain and functioning of the ecosystem. Our review shows a growing body of published evidence that these systemic insecticides pose a serious risk of harm to a broad range of terrestrial, aquatic, and marine organisms. As a result, an impact on the many food chains they support is expected. Sustainable choices should be made while implementing pest control methods and products in order to alleviate potential harm for food security, ecosystem services, and the full functionality of all systems of the environment. The continued widespread use of neonicotinoid and fipronil insecticides would be a perilous strategy for the maintenance of ecosystem services. One of the lead authors of this study, Dr. Jean-Marc Bonmatin of the National Center for Scientific Research in France, stated that the evidence is very clear. We are witnessing a threat to the productivity of our natural and farmed environment, equivalent to that posed by organophosphates, or DDT. Far from protecting food production, the use of neonics is threatening the very infrastructure which enables it, imperiling the pollinators, habitat engineers, and natural pest controllers at the heart of a functioning ecosystem. Over the last 3 years alone, the number of mass die-offs reported of managed and wild bee colonies around the world is staggering. There can no longer be any doubt that there is a causal relationship between the rising prevalence of bee loss and diseases contributing to CCD, which runs parallel to the worldwide growth in neonic contamination. The unsustainable decline of the pollinators is an early indicator of the wider impacts to come on other plant and animal life, including humans. Scientists all across the globe are warning that without profound changes to the way human beings manage the planet, unsustainable declines in pollinators and systemic contamination of the ecosystem could result in a phenomenon known as a cascading extinction event, with devastating consequences right up to the top of the food chain. It seems that we have forgotten the lessons we learned in the 1970s, when the lethal effects of DDT, a nerve gas developed during World War II, were finally recognized and banned in the U.S. Neonicotinoids are also highly toxic nerve poisons, but they are much more lethal, about 6,000 times more deadly than DDT. These systemic insecticides represent a new chapter in the apparent shortcomings of the regulatory pesticide review and approval process that do not fully consider the risks posed by these new technologies that are worth billions to the companies who manufacture them. The most common and no doubt most profitable method for the use of neonics in industrial agriculture is the practice of pre-treating the seeds. Seed coatings are now used in approximately 90% of neonic pesticide treatments and are literally just insurance policies against the possibility of an infestation, typically from beetles or aphids, and they are only effective against the pests for about 40 days. This is known as prophylactic treatment or preemptive treatment, and would be akin to taking massive amounts of antibiotics just in case you might get sick. In addition to creating a systemically toxic environment, this practice of preemptive pest control threatens to create super resistance in pests, just like antibiotics create superbugs from overuse. There are no requirements for labeling insecticide-coated seeds because the EPA does not consider the seeds as a regulated pesticide. Neonics are widely used on corn and soybean seeds, monocrops for the industrial food and biofuel industries, but are exempt from pesticide regulations. Between 1993 and 2013, more than 150 million acres of farmland in the United States were planted with treated seeds. As of 2016, that number has grown to 176 million acres. These are crops that most commonly use GMO and neonic treated seeds, as well as foliar spraying. When a map of the data from the Bee-Informed Partnership indicating the states with the highest number of managed bee colony loss is overlaid onto the map showing the growth of neonic use from the U.S. Geological Survey's Pesticides Synthesis Project, a direct correlation is apparent. States in the heartland and along the Mississippi corridor, as well as the Ozarks, Appalachia, and New England, experienced managed bee losses in excess of 40 to 60% between 2014 and 2015. Environmental Science and Technology published a report in 2015 which illustrated the large-scale deployment of seed treatments on food and feedstock crops in the United States. In addition to corn and soybeans, they have also been used on the vast majority of fruits and vegetables, including apples, cherries, peaches, oranges, berries, leafy greens, tomatoes, potatoes, wheat, rice, nuts, and grapes, crops that depend on pollinators and crops that we eat every day. But these are not pesticides that can just be washed off, because the plants that grew them have been contaminated at the cellular level if they were treated with systemic pesticides. Recent studies of neonic contamination not only found residue in the pollen and nectar of treated crops, but also in bodies of water where the runoff from the farms accumulates. Studies have shown that similar immune deficiencies experienced by the bees and other insects were also observed in aquatic food sources, such as shellfish and fish species that had been exposed to neonic-contaminated water. A study conducted by Dr. Alex Liu of the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health, published in July 2015, found that 70% of pollen and honey samples collected from foraging bees in Massachusetts contained at least one neonic. This finding suggests that bees are at risk of neonic exposure anytime they are foraging anywhere in the state of Massachusetts. These findings also suggest that not only do these pesticides pose a significant risk for the survival of honeybees, but they also may pose health risks for people inhaling neonicotinoid contaminated pollen. The data presented in this study should serve as a basis for public policy that aims to reduce neonicotinoid exposure. And while neonics have not been shown to accumulate in human or animal tissue in the way DDT once did, we are just now beginning to understand and study the effects these chemicals have on humans. A 2012 Japanese study led by scientist Junko Kimura-Kuroda was the first to show that the neonicotinoids may adversely affect human health, especially the developing brain. The researchers in the Japanese study warn that detailed investigation of neonicotinoids is needed to protect the health of human children. Could the systemic contamination by neonics also be affecting humans? Is this what the bees are trying to tell us? The latest data does suggest they should be studied further as a possible cause of broad-spectrum autism and other neurodevelopmental and autoimmune disorders in humans, which have increased sharply since the introduction of neonics into the environment and our food supply. Given their widespread use and infiltration into the economics of global agriculture, it is surprising to find that few studies have offered any real proof that crop yields have increased since the introduction of neonics, nor that there is any substantial economic benefit to farmers or to global food production that outweighs the negative impacts to the ecosystem. Currently, there are only 6 companies that control the production of pesticides and the seeds used in industrial farming. The estimated earnings of these companies is in the billions. So this begs the question, are the pollinators being poisoned for profit? Are we being poisoned for profit? But there is hope. Just like the bees in the hive and the smallest of creatures who provide the largest of ecological services, each one of us can make a difference. Being aware of the dangers of these pesticides is the first step. We can all do a little bit to help by buying organic food and products and ensuring that we do not buy or use products that contain neonics. Governments and regulatory agencies are in place to protect us, not the manufacturers of chemicals and genetically modified seeds. They must be held accountable to protect the environment and ensure that our food is safe to eat. Until it can be categorically proven that neonics are not adversely impacting pollinator and human health and the ecosystem, we must demand that government adopt precautionary principles of pest control and ban the use of neonics. The challenges to overcome the power of profit for poison are immense. We must all work together in a global effort to understand the magnitude of pollinator loss and the potential consequences if left unchecked. The pollinators need us, and we need each other to survive and thrive as nature intended. We must choose to be or not to be.